In the quiet town of Evergreen Valley, struggling single dad and skilled mechanic Daniel Roberts is barely keeping his repair shop afloat while raising his teenage daughter alone. When Millionaire CEO Margaret Kensington's luxury car breaks down, during a storm, what begins as a routine roadside repair becomes life-changing. As Daniel works on her vehicle, he notices a distinctive antique ring on her finger, identical to a treasured family heirloom his grandfather lost decades ago. This chance encounter sets in motion an extraordinary journey that connects two seemingly separate worlds, uncovers a long-buried injustice, and gives both Daniel and Margaret a second chance at what they've each been missing. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Rain hammered the roof of Dixon Auto Repair as Daniel Roberts wiped his calloused hands on a shop rag that had seen better days. The clock on the wall read 8:45 p.m., another late night. Through the garage door window, he could see his 15-year-old daughter Sophia sitting in the small office area, textbooks spread across the desk as she worked on her math homework by the glow of a desk lamp. Daniel sighed as he glanced down at the engine he'd been working on. 5 more hours of labor and maybe, just maybe, they could afford the electric bill this month without dipping into Sophia's college fund again, a fund that was already dangerously depleted. "Hey, Dad?" Sophia called from the office. "Mr. Jenkins texted. He made that chicken pot pie you like and left it in our oven. He used his key." Daniel smiled despite his exhaustion. "Tell him thanks. We shouldn't be too much longer." As Sophia returned to her homework, Daniel's gaze lingered on her. She had her mother's eyes, intelligent, determined, kind. Christine had been gone 5 years now, but sometimes the grief still hit him like a physical blow, especially on nights like this, when he felt the weight of raising their daughter alone, of trying to give her everything she deserved despite their circumstances. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Daniel wiped his hands again and picked up. "Dixon Auto Repair, this is Daniel." "Hello," a woman's voice replied, cultured, but with an edge of concern. "My car's broken down about 5 miles outside of town on Westridge Road. I tried calling for a tow, but was told it would be at least 3 hours. The man I spoke with suggested I try you directly." Daniel glanced at the clock again, nearly closing time, and the storm was getting worse. "But they needed the money. I can be there in 15 minutes. What seems to be the problem?" "I'm not sure. The engine just died. All the warning lights came on at once." "What kind of car?" "A Mercedes S-Class, 2023 model." Daniel raised his eyebrows. "Nobody in Evergreen Valley drove a car like that. I'll be there soon. Do you have somewhere dry to?" "Wait, I'm still in the car. Thank you for coming out in this weather." Daniel hung up and grabbed his emergency toolbox and rain jacket. "Sophia," he called, "we've got a roadside call. You want to wait here or come with me?" Sophia appeared in the doorway, already packing up her books. "Come with you. Mr. Jenkins will worry if I'm here alone this late." 10 minutes later, Daniel's old pickup truck splashed through puddles on Westridge Road, wipers working overtime against the downpour. Sophia sat quietly beside him, gazing out at the stormy night. "You did great on that math test," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "Ms. Gomez told me." Sophia shrugged, but he caught her small smile. "It was just algebra." "Just algebra," Daniel chuckled. "You know, when I was designing safety systems, I had engineers with degrees who couldn't work through the equations you're doing at 15. You miss it, don't you? The engineering work." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Sometimes. But Dixon's is good work too, honest work. But it's not what you trained for, not what you loved." Before Daniel could respond, his headlights illuminated a sleek black Mercedes pulled onto the shoulder ahead. Parked behind it was a blue sedan. Unexpected. "Looks like someone stopped to help already," Daniel remarked as he pulled over. As they approached the Mercedes, Daniel could see a woman sitting inside talking on her phone. She noticed them and quickly ended her call, stepping out under a large black umbrella. Even in the poor lighting, Daniel could tell her raincoat cost more than his monthly rent. Her driver's side door remained open, interior light spilling out. "Into the rainy darkness, Mr. Roberts?" she asked. "I'm Margaret Kensington. Thank you for coming so quickly. Daniel, please. This is my daughter, Sophia." Margaret nodded at Sophia with a genuine smile. "Hello, Sophia." "What about the other car?" Daniel asked, gesturing to the blue sedan. "Oh, that's Thomas, my driver. He was following me back from Chicago. I was driving myself today." Daniel nodded. Processing this information, a woman wealthy enough to have a driver, yet choosing to drive herself. Interesting. "Let me take a look." Daniel approached the Mercedes. "When did it start acting up?" "About 20 minutes ago. The engine made an unusual sound. Then several warning lights appeared, and it gradually lost power until I had to pull over." Daniel gestured toward the hood. "Mind if I—" "Please," Margaret said, stepping aside. As Daniel popped the hood and set up a portable work light, Margaret turned to Sophia, who was standing awkwardly in the rain despite her jacket. "Would you like to wait in my car where it's dry?" The heater was working fine until everything else failed. Sophia looked at her father, who nodded. "Thank you," Sophia said, slipping into the passenger seat. Margaret joined Daniel at the front of the car, holding her umbrella over both of them. "Is it serious?" "Could be several things. Best case, a sensor malfunction. Worst case." Daniel trailed off as he examined the engine. "Any unusual sounds before it died?" A slight whirring, followed by a clicking. Daniel nodded, his experienced hands moving methodically through his diagnostic routine. Expensive car like this shouldn't be failing on the highway. "That's what the dealership promised," Margaret said with a hint of frustration. "Though to be fair, I've pushed it rather hard the past few months. Too many long drives, not enough maintenance." Daniel glanced up. There was something refreshingly honest about her admission. Most wealthy clients he'd encountered would have blamed the manufacturer, the mechanic, anyone but themselves. "Looks like your timing chain tensioner failed," he said after a few minutes. "Damaged some valves in the process. That sounds expensive." "For a Mercedes? Very. But I can get you back on the road tonight, at least enough to get you home or to a dealership. It won't be a permanent fix." Margaret nodded. "That would be wonderful. Though I'm keeping you and your daughter out in this awful weather." "It's our job," Daniel replied simply. As he worked, Margaret occasionally handed him tools, surprising him with her knowledge of what he needed. The rain continued to pour around them, but they established a comfortable rhythm. From time to time, Daniel glanced into the car, where Sophia appeared to be showing Margaret something on her phone, both of them laughing. "Your daughter seems very bright," Margaret commented. "She is, top of her class, wants to study engineering." Following in her father's footsteps, Daniel paused. "How did you know I was an engineer?" Margaret smiled. "The way you approach the problem, methodical, analytical. Not just looking for symptoms, but understanding the system." Daniel resumed working. "That was a lifetime ago." "What happened?" Margaret asked, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, that's personal. You don't have to answer." "No, it's okay." Daniel secured a bolt before continuing. "I worked for Holloway Industries, developing automotive safety systems, had a prototype that could have reduced accident fatalities by almost 40%. But then..." He stopped, wondering why he was telling his life story to a stranger in the rain. "Corporate politics. Let's just say I took the fall for someone else's mistake. Nobody in the industry would touch me after that." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "That's terrible. Was it worth it? Taking the blame?" 15 people would have lost their jobs, people with families, mortgages, my team. Daniel shrugged. Seemed worth it at the time. Less sure now when I look at Sophia and what she's had to sacrifice. As Daniel reached across the engine, his work light illuminated Margaret's hand as she steadied herself against the car. On her finger was a ring, gold with an unusual pattern of interlocking circles surrounding a small ruby. The craftsmanship was distinctive, unlike anything modern. Daniel froze, staring at the ring. His heart pounded in his chest. "Mr. Roberts? Daniel, is everything all right?" "That ring," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Where did you get it?" Margaret glanced down, clearly surprised by the question. "It was my grandmother's, a family heirloom. Why do you ask?" Daniel swallowed hard. "My grandfather had one exactly like it. It's been lost for years, but I'd recognize that design anywhere. He was a jeweler before the war, said it was part of a match set he made for twin sisters," Margaret finished, her eyes widening. "Elizabeth and Catherine Harmon. That's what my grandmother told me." They stared at each other in disbelief as the rain pounded around them. "Dad?" Sophia called from the car. "You okay?" Daniel blinked, returning to the task at hand. "I'm fine, sweetheart." He turned back to the engine, mind racing. It couldn't be a coincidence. The ring, the design, the story. But how could Margaret Kensington be connected to his grandfather's past? "I've got it stabilized," he said, closing the hood. "It'll get you home, but no farther. The timing's still off, and you risk more damage if you push it." Margaret seemed equally distracted now. "Thank you. What do I owe you?" Daniel named a modest sum, far less than an emergency call warranted. Margaret reached for her purse, then paused. "Daniel, would you and Sophia join me for dinner tomorrow? At my place. I'd like to hear more about your grandfather and the ring." Daniel hesitated. People like Margaret Kensington didn't invite people like him to dinner. "And yet, we'd be honored," he found himself saying. "Wonderful. The lake house on Cherry Blossom Drive, 7 o'clock. Daniel nodded, then watched as Margaret returned to her car. Sophia climbed out, rejoining her father, as the Mercedes started with a rumble that was far from healthy but functional. "She's nice," Sophia said as they walked back to their truck. "Not what I expected." "No," Daniel agreed, watching the taillights disappear into the rainy night. "Not what I expected at all." As they drove home, Daniel couldn't shake the image of the ring from his mind. After Christine died, he'd stopped believing in fate or destiny. But tonight, in the middle of a storm, on a random service call, he'd seen a piece of his family's past resurface in the most unlikely place. Whatever connection existed between Margaret Kensington and his grandfather's ring, Daniel knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Dixon Auto Repair earlier than usual. He needed time alone with the old metal lockbox he kept hidden beneath the floorboards of the shop's office, a collection of his grandfather's personal effects that had survived decades of moves and life changes. The shop was quiet, still, an hour before Clarence would arrive to open up. Daniel knelt on the worn linoleum floor, prying up the loose board to reveal the dusty box beneath. He hadn't looked inside for years, not since right after Christine's funeral, when grief had driven him to search for connections to his own past. The hinges creaked as he opened the lid. Inside lay an assortment of yellowed photographs, handwritten letters, and a small leather journal. Daniel rifled through them until he found what he was looking for. A faded photograph of his grandfather standing proudly outside his jewelry shop circa 1952. Daniel turned it over to read the inscription. Joseph Roberts, Roberts Fine Jewelry, Chicago. Chicago. Daniel whispered to himself, the same city where Margaret Kensington's business was headquartered. He continued searching until he found a small sketch in his grandfather's precise hand, a design for a pair of rings with interlocking circles surrounding a gemstone. In the margins were notes: for E and C Harmon, twin sisters, gold, blue ruby, symbol of eternal connection. The bell above the shop door jingled, startling Daniel. "Daniel, you in here already?" Clarence's voice called out. Daniel quickly replaced the contents, slid the box back into its hiding place, and returned the floorboard. "In the office," he answered, brushing dust from his knees as he stood. Clarence Dixon appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. At 68, he moved slower than he once had, but his mind remained sharp. "You're here awful early. Everything okay?" "Fine. Just catching up on some paperwork." Clarence eyed him skeptically. "Heard you went out on a call last night. Must have been important to drag you and Sophia out in that storm. Mercedes broke down on Westridge, timing chain tensioner." "Mercedes, huh?" Clarence whistled low. "Tourist?" Daniel hesitated. "Not exactly. Margaret Kensington said she has a lake house here." Recognition flashed across Clarence's face. "The Kensington place? That mansion's been sitting empty for years. Heard some Chicago big shot bought it recently. Guess that's her." Daniel nodded. "Mine's still on the ring and the sketch. She pay you properly for an emergency call?" "She did. Actually invited us to dinner tonight." Clarence's eyebrows shot up. "Dinner? With a Kensington? Well. Daniel Roberts moving up in the world." Daniel shook his head. "It's not like that. Just..." He paused, unsure how to explain. "A thank you, I guess." The phone rang, saving Daniel from further explanation. As Clarence answered it, Daniel escaped to the garage to prepare for the day's appointments, but his thoughts remained fixed on the connections between his grandfather's ring design and the woman who had appeared so unexpectedly in his life. By late afternoon, anxiety had begun to gnaw at Daniel's stomach. He hadn't been to a social dinner in years, not since before Christine's illness had consumed their lives, and certainly never at a lakeside mansion. "Dad, we're going to be late," Sophia called from their small bathroom, where she was attempting to tame her dark curls with limited success. "Almost ready," Daniel replied, though he was still staring at his meager wardrobe with despair. He finally settled on his one decent pair of slacks and a blue button-down shirt Christine had bought him for their last anniversary together. Wilfred Jenkins was waiting outside when they emerged from their modest single-story home. "You two look nice," the elderly man commented from his porch across the street. "Hot date?" "Dinner invitation," Daniel explained, helping Sophia into their truck. "Don't wait up, Wilfred," the old man chuckled. "At my age, I never wait up. Dorothy and I will." "Leave the porch light on." The drive to Cherry Blossom Drive took them from their working-class neighborhood to the affluent Lake District, where Evergreen Valley's wealthiest residents owned summer homes. As they approached the address Margaret had given them, Sophia pressed, her face to the window. "Dad, that can't be it," she whispered, as Daniel turned into a long, winding driveway that led to an elegant craftsman-style house overlooking the lake. The home wasn't as ostentatious as Daniel had feared, large but tasteful, with warm lighting glowing from within. Daniel parked his battered truck next to a sleek BMW and Margaret's newly repaired Mercedes. Before they could reach the front door, it swung open to reveal Margaret herself, dressed casually in slacks and a simple blouse. "You found it. Come in, please." She welcomed them inside, where the aroma of home-cooked food filled the air. Daniel was surprised. He'd expected a professional chef for catering, not what appeared to be Margaret's own cooking. "I hope you like lasagna," she said, leading them through to a spacious kitchen. "It's my grandmother's recipe, one of the few things I can make without burning down the house." "It smells amazing," Sophia said, visibly relaxing at the informal atmosphere. Would you like some help? Daniel offered. Actually, yes, the salad still needs tossing. As Daniel assisted Margaret with final dinner preparations, he noticed there were only 3 place settings at the dining table. No staff, no driver, no business associates, just the 3 of them. It felt strangely intimate. Over dinner, conversation flowed more easily than Daniel had anticipated. Margaret asked Sophia about school, listening with genuine interest to the teenager's passionate explanation of her science project involving alternative energy sources. "That's quite impressive," Margaret said. "We fund research grants in that area through the Kensington Foundation. Perhaps you'd consider applying for our Youth Science Initiative next year." Sophia's eyes widened. "Really? That would be amazing, though I warn you," Margaret added with a smile, "the competition is fierce, but based on what you've told me, you'd be a strong contender." As they finished the main course, Daniel finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind all day. "The ring, would you mind if I looked at it more closely?" Margaret nodded, slipping the gold band from her finger and passing it to him. "It's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother told me it was specially made for her mother." Daniel examined it carefully, comparing it to the memory of his grandfather's sketch. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. The intricate pattern of interlocking circles, the precisely set ruby, the minute inscription inside the band. J.R. Fine Jewelry, Chicago, 1952. Daniel read aloud. "Those are my grandfather's initials, Joseph Roberts." He passed the ring back to Margaret, their fingers brushing momentarily. He had a small shop in downtown Chicago after the war. He always said these rings were special, made for twin sisters who'd been separated as children and reunited as adults. Margaret stared at him, her composure faltering for the first time. "That's exactly the story my grandmother told me." Elizabeth and Catherine Harmon separated during the Depression when their parents couldn't afford to feed both children. One was sent to relatives, the other kept. They found each other 20 years later and commissioned matching rings to symbolize their reconnection. Daniel finished. "My grandfather designed them specifically with interlocking circles, an eternal bond that couldn't be broken again." Margaret touched the ring thoughtfully. "Elizabeth was my great-grandmother. She always said the ring's match was lost when her sister Catherine moved west in the late 50s. Which is how it ended up with my grandfather," Daniel realized. "He moved the family to California in 58. Must have taken the second ring as payment or a keepsake. He always said it was meant to be returned someday, but he lost touch with the family." A heavy silence fell between them, the weight of this unexpected connection settling in the room. "It's remarkable," Margaret finally said. "Out of all the mechanics in the area, I happen to break down where you would find me." "I don't believe in coincidences," Daniel admitted. "Neither do I." As Margaret served coffee and a simple apple tart for dessert, the conversation shifted to their current lives. Daniel found himself opening up about his work at Holloway Industries and the safety system he'd developed before his career collapsed. "The prototype was revolutionary," he explained, his passion for the work still evident. "It used predictive analysis to detect potential collision scenarios seconds before they occurred, enough time to deploy protective measures beyond standard airbags. It could have saved thousands of lives." "What happened?" Margaret asked. Daniel's expression darkened. "Edward Holloway happened, the CEO's son. He was heading the project officially, but he was rarely present, more interested in corporate politics than the engineering. When the first prototype failed during a demonstration for investors, he needed a scapegoat. So he blamed you," Margaret concluded. "I let him. The alternative was watching my entire team get fired. I figured I could find another job with my credentials." Daniel laughed bitterly. I was wrong. Holloway made sure no one in the industry would touch me. That's despicable, Margaret said, genuine anger in her voice. Dad never fought it, Sophia interjected, surprising both adults. He should have. His design wasn't the problem. Someone tampered with the prototype the night before the demonstration. Dad knew it but couldn't prove it. Daniel stared at his daughter. How did you know? That Mom told me before she died. Said it was important I knew what kind of man my father really was. That integrity like yours is rare. Daniel swallowed hard, unprepared for the emotion that surged through him at his daughter's words, at the realization that Christine had understood and valued his choice even as they struggled with its consequences. Margaret watched them with unmistakable compassion. Your wife sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, Daniel agreed softly. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret walked them to the door. I'm glad you both came tonight. I'd like to continue our conversation, perhaps see if we can solve the mystery of how these rings became separated. And Daniel, she hesitated, I'd be interested in hearing more about your safety system sometime. My company invests in automotive technology, among other things. Daniel tensed, immediately wary. I appreciate the interest, but that part of my life is over. Margaret nodded, accepting his boundary. Of course. Either way, I hope you'll visit. Again, it gets rather lonely up here. Lonely? Sophia asked. But you're so successful. Margaret smiled sadly. Success and happiness aren't always the same thing, Sophia. Something I've learned the hard way. On the drive home, Sophia was uncharacteristically quiet. You okay? Daniel asked. She's different than I expected, Sophia finally said. More real. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone cold, I guess. But she made her grandmother's lasagna recipe and cares about the same things we do. Sophia paused. And I think she was genuinely interested in your safety system. That's in the past, Sophia. Why? Because Edward Holloway said so. There was an edge to his daughter's voice he rarely heard. Mum wouldn't have wanted you to give up on it. She believed in you. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, but remained silent. When they arrived home, Sophia headed straight to her room, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He found himself standing before the small fireplace mantel, where Christine's photograph held the place of honor. Next to it was a small wooden box, the one that had once contained his grandfather's other treasures, including the sketch of the rings. What do you think, Chris? He whispered to the photograph. Is this all just coincidence or something more? The photograph offered no answers, but as Daniel prepared for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had been set in motion. The connection between the rings, between his grandfather and Margaret's family, between his past work and her current interests, it all seemed too purposeful to be mere chance. For the first time in years, Daniel fell asleep with something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it for what it was, hope. A week passed without further contact from Margaret. Daniel tried to convince himself it was for the best. People from different worlds rarely found lasting connections. Yet he couldn't deny his disappointment each time the phone rang at the garage, and it wasn't her voice on the line. You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes. Marco commented as they worked side by side on a transmission rebuild. The younger mechanic had been with Dixon Auto Repair for 3 years and had become something of a friend to Daniel. Hot date ghosting you? Daniel shot him a look, just expecting a parts delivery. Sure, Marco smirked. Parts delivery. That why you've been walking around looking like someone stole your dog all week? Before Daniel could respond, Clarence poked his head into the garage. Daniel, got a call you might want to take. Line 2. Daniel wiped his hands and picked up the shop phone, aware of Marco and Clarence exchanging knowing glances. This is Daniel. Hello, Daniel. It's Margaret Kensington. Daniel turned away from his colleague's obvious eavesdropping. Margaret, good to hear from you. I apologize for not calling sooner. I was called back to Chicago for an emergency board meeting. I'm actually still here, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation. Her voice became more hesitant. I've been doing some research on your grandfather's jewelry shop and found some interesting connections to my family. What kind of connections? The kind better discussed in person. I'll be returning to Evergreen Valley tomorrow. Would you be available for lunch? I'd have to check the work schedule, Daniel said, glancing at Clarence, who was making exaggerated gestures indicating he should accept. Of course, I understand you have commitments. No, it should be fine. Where and when? The Ridge Cafe at noon? I've heard they make excellent sandwiches. They do, Daniel confirmed, surprised at her choice of the modest local diner rather than one of the upscale restaurants by the lake. After setting the details, Daniel hung up to find both Marco and Clarence staring at him with undisguised curiosity. Margaret Kensington, huh? Clarence said, folding his arms. The millionaire from Chicago. We're just discussing some family history, Daniel explained. Her great-grandmother knew my grandfather. Clarence raised a skeptical eyebrow. And I'm secretly Elvis Presley. It's not like that, Daniel insisted, returning to the transmission. She's just interested in the connection. Right, Marco said. Millionaires are always super interested in family connections to small-town mechanics. Daniel ignored them, focusing on his work, but their words echoed in his mind. What did Margaret Kensington really want from him? The Ridge Cafe occupied the corner of Main Street and Elm, its large windows offering views of Evergreen Valley's modest downtown. Daniel arrived 5 minutes early, suddenly self-conscious about his work clothes. He'd changed his shirt, but still wore his shop jeans and boots. There hadn't been time for more. He spotted Margaret already seated in a booth by the window. She'd dressed down in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair gathered in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, more approachable, and somehow even more beautiful. Daniel, she smiled as he slid into the booth opposite her. Thank you for making time. No problem. Clarence practically shoved me out the door. Your boss? More like a second father these days, Daniel admitted. He's been looking out for Sophia and me since we moved here. The waitress, Tina, approached with a pot of coffee. Hey, Daniel, the usual. Please. And for your friend? Tina asked, eyeing Margaret with poorly disguised curiosity. I'll have the turkey club, please, Margaret said pleasantly. And coffee would be wonderful. As Tina departed, Margaret leaned forward. I brought some things I thought might interest you. She opened a leather portfolio and removed several photographs and documents. These belong to my grandmother, she explained, passing him a black and white photograph of two young women standing arm in arm outside a jewelry shop. Elizabeth and Catherine Harmon, 1952, the day they received their rings. Daniel studied the image with fascination. That's my grandfather's shop. He pointed to the sign visible in the background. Robert's Fine Jewelry. Yes, and this, Margaret continued, sliding forward a yellowed receipt, is the original purchase record. Daniel examined the faded paper. In his grandfather's distinctive handwriting was an itemized bill for 2 gold rings with ruby setting, custom design, along with the date and the Harmon sisters' names. I've been to the Chicago Historical Society archives, Margaret explained. Found these among their records of small businesses from that era. I also discovered this. She passed him a newspaper clipping from 1959, bearing the headline, Local Jeweler Loses Shop in Suspicious Fire. Daniel scanned the article, which detailed how Joseph Roberts' jewelry store had burned down under circumstances the fire department called questionable. My grandfather never talked about this, Daniel said softly. He always said he left Chicago for better opportunities out west. The article mentions he was in a dispute with a local businessman over a property line, a businessman named Harold Kensington. Margaret met his eyes. My grandfather. Daniel looked up sharply. Your grandfather forced mine out of business? It Appears so. Margaret's expression was pained. Harold Kensington was not a good man. He built his real estate empire through intimidation and occasionally illegal tactics. When your grandfather refused to sell his shop, my grandfather apparently took matters into his own hands. Daniel sat back, processing this revelation. So, the rings were separated because my grandfather was driven out of Chicago by your grandfather. Yes. And I think Catherine's ring, the one your grandfather kept, was meant to be a reminder of the injustice. Margaret hesitated. There's more. After finding these records, I had a private investigator look into the Holloway Industries incident that ended your career. Daniel stiffened. You did what? I needed to understand if history was repeating itself, Margaret said calmly. If powerful men in my circle were still destroying honest people's lives. And what did your investigation find? Daniel asked, his voice tight. Evidence that Edward Holloway deliberately sabotaged your prototype. The investigator located a former security guard who witnessed Edward entering the lab the night before the demonstration. He was paid to keep quiet. Daniel's hands clenched around his coffee mug. I knew it. I always knew it. The guard is willing to testify now. He's terminally ill and wants to clear his conscience. Why are you telling me this? Daniel demanded. What do you want from me, Margaret? Their conversation paused as Tina delivered their food, eyeing them curiously before departing. Margaret waited until they were alone before answering. Two things. First, I want to make amends for what my family did to yours. The Kensington Foundation has a restoration fund specifically created to right historical wrongs committed by my grandfather. Your family deserves compensation. I don't want your money, Daniel said flatly. I understand that, but consider it for Sophia's future. Her college education shouldn't be compromised because of what happened to you. Daniel fell silent, unable to argue against his daughter's interests. And the second thing, he finally asked, I want to help you rebuild your safety system. Properly this time, with financial backing and legal protection from people like Edward Holloway. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Why would you do that? Because it could save lives, Margaret said simply. And because I believe in justice. Edward Holloway stole your work and your reputation. I want to help you reclaim both. Daniel pushed his barely touched sandwich aside. So this is all about guilt? Your grandfather destroyed my grandfather's business, and now you want to ease your conscience. Hurt flashed across Margaret's face. That's not fair, isn't it? The wealthy Kensington swooping in to rescue the struggling mechanic, making everything right with her millions? That's not how I see it, Margaret said quietly. How do you see it then? Margaret met his gaze directly. I see it as two people connected by history being given a chance to right old wrongs. I see your brilliant mind being wasted on oil changes when you could be saving lives. And yes, I see an opportunity to ensure my family's fortune finally does something truly worthwhile. Daniel wanted to argue, to reject her offer outright, but the sincerity in her eyes gave him pause. I need time to think about this, he finally said. Of course. Margaret removed a business card from her purse. My private number. When you're ready to talk, call me. She hesitated. And Daniel, this isn't charity. It's an investment in you, in your work, and in what we could accomplish together. As Margaret paid the bill, despite his protests, and walked out of the cafe, Daniel remained seated, turning her card over in his hands. Through the window, he watched her slide into her Mercedes and drive away, her words echoing in his mind. Later that afternoon, as Daniel worked methodically on a break, Job! Sophia burst into the garage, her face flushed with excitement. Dad, you'll never believe what happened. She waved a letter in her hand. I got accepted into the regional science competition. Ms. Gomez submitted my alternative energy project. Daniel smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. That's fantastic. Sweetheart, The winner gets a full scholarship to the Engineering Summer Institute at Westridge University, Sophia continued, practically bouncing. The best young engineers in the country go there. Daniel's smile faltered. That's in Chicago, isn't it? Sophia nodded eagerly. 10 weeks of advanced engineering instruction, but her excitement dimmed. The registration fee is $2,000, even if I win the scholarship for tuition. Daniel's heart sank. $2,000 might as well have been $2 million with their current finances. We'll figure something out, he promised, though he had no idea how. I know we will, Sophia said, her faith in him unwavering. Oh, and Ms. Gomez wants to talk to you. She said it's important. Teresa Gomez had been Sophia's math teacher for 2 years, one of the few educators who truly appreciated his daughter's brilliance. Daniel called her that evening after closing the shop. Daniel, thank you for calling, Teresa said. I wanted to discuss Sophia's project for the competition. It's exceptional work, but she needs access to proper testing equipment to finalize her prototype. What kind of equipment? The kind usually found in university labs, not high schools, Teresa explained. I've tried reaching out to colleagues at Westridge Community College, but no luck. Daniel thought of Margaret's offer, of the resources she could provide. His pride wrestled with his desire to give Sophia every opportunity. I might know someone who can help, he said finally. Let me make a call. After saying goodnight to Teresa, Daniel sat on the porch steps of their small home, Margaret's business card in his hand. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Across the street, Wilfred and Dorothy Jenkins sat on their own porch, their silhouettes visible in the gathering dusk. Daniel thought about his grandfather, forced from his livelihood by Margaret's grandfather, about his own career, destroyed by Edward Holloway, about the cycles of injustice that seemed to follow his family. But he also thought about Sophia's excitement, her potential, her dreams that deserved a chance to flourish, and about Margaret's genuine desire to make things right. With a deep breath, Daniel dialed the number. Hello, Margaret answered on the second ring. It's Daniel. I've been thinking about your offer. And I'm not ready to commit to rebuilding the safety system. That's complicated. Daniel paused. But there's something else you might be able to help with. Something for Sophia. As he explained about the science competition and the equipment, Sophia needed. Margaret listened attentively. Of course I can help, she said when he finished. The Kensington Foundation has a mobile STEM lab we send to underserved schools. I can have it brought to Evergreen Valley High next week. That's more than I expected, Daniel admitted. Consider it a starting point, Margaret replied, a gesture of good faith. After they said goodbye, Daniel remained on the porch steps, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine possibilities beyond the day-to-day struggle of survival. Possibilities that included reclaiming his work, securing Sophia's future, and perhaps even finding a connection with someone who understood both his past and his potential. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something else entirely: anticipation. The Kensington Foundation's mobile STEM lab arrived at Evergreen Valley High School on a Tuesday morning, causing a stir among students and faculty alike. The converted bus, equipped with advanced testing equipment, 3D printers, and engineering workstations, sat prominently in the school parking lot like a spaceship that had landed in a cornfield. Daniel watched from his truck as Sophia approached the lab with her classmates, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. Margaret stood by the entrance, dressed professionally but without ostentation, greeting each student individually. When she reached Sophia, she placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, leaning down to say something that made Sophia beam with pride. Quite the setup, Teresa Gomez remarked, appearing beside Daniel's truck. The math teacher's eyes sparkled with excitement. I've never seen our students this enthusiastic about science." Daniel nodded, still processing the reality of what Margaret had accomplished with a single phone call. "It's impressive. Your friend must have significant influence," Teresa observed. "We've been applying for enhanced STEM resources for years without success." "She wants to help," Daniel said simply. "Well, I'm not questioning it. This is exactly what Sophia and the other students need." Teresa smiled. "You should join us." Margaret specifically asked if you'd be coming. Daniel hesitated. He'd taken 2 hours off from the garage to see the lab's arrival, but Clarence was expecting him back. "I can't today. Tell Margaret I'll call her later." As he drove to Dixon Auto Repair, Daniel found himself conflicted. Margaret's generosity towards Sophia and her classmates was undeniable, yet he couldn't shake a lingering suspicion about her motives. Was this truly about making amends, or did she have other reasons for inserting herself into their lives? The garage was unusually quiet when he arrived. Clarence sat at the front desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed invoices. "How was the fancy science bus?" he asked without looking up. "Impressive," Daniel admitted. The kids were thrilled. Clarence removed his glasses. "You got a visitor while you were gone. Didn't leave a name, but asked a lot of questions about you. Professional type, suit and tie, drove a rental car with Chicago plates." Daniel frowned. "What kind of questions?" "How long you'd worked here, your background, whether you had family." Clarence's expression grew serious. "I didn't like his tone, so I didn't tell him much. Said if he wanted to know about Daniel Roberts, he should ask Daniel Roberts." An uneasy feeling settled in Daniel's stomach. Did he say who he represented? Nope, but he left this. Clarence handed Daniel a business card. The sleek black card bore a familiar logo, Holloway Industries. "Brian Mitchell, Vice President of Research and Development," Daniel read aloud. His former colleague, the man who had taken over his position after Edward Holloway forced him out. "Friend of yours?" Clarence asked. "Once, not anymore." Daniel pocketed the card. "If he comes back, tell him I'm not interested." But as Daniel immersed himself in work, questions nagged at him. Why would Brian Mitchell come looking for him after all these years? And why now, just as Margaret Kensington had entered his life? That evening, as Daniel and Sophia walked home from the bus stop where the STEM lab had been parked for the day, Sophia couldn't contain her excitement. "Dad," the spectroscopic analyzer confirmed, "my algae-based biofuel is producing 15% higher energy output than standard biodiesel." She practically danced along the sidewalk. "Ms. Gomez says my project could win not just regionals, but maybe even nationals." Daniel smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "That's fantastic, Soph. And Margaret, I mean Ms. Kensington, she knows so much about sustainable energy investment. She helped me refine my financial projections for commercial scalability." Sophia glanced at him. "She asked about you, said you hadn't returned her calls." Daniel sighed. He'd been avoiding Margaret's calls since the STEM lab arrived 3 days ago, unsure what to say now that Brian Mitchell had appeared in town. "I've been busy at the garage." Sophia gave him a skeptical look, reminiscent of her mother. "Too busy to say thank you for the most amazing opportunity I've ever had?" "It's complicated, Sophia." "It doesn't seem complicated to me. She's helped us when no one else would." Sophia stopped walking, her expression suddenly serious. "Is it because she's rich? Would you rather we struggle than accept help from someone like her?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. "Of course not. I need to be careful." "Why?" "Because of what happened with Holloway. Margaret isn't like that." "You don't know that," Daniel countered. "You've only known her for a week." "I'm a good judge of character," Sophia insisted. "Mom always said so." The mention of Christine softened Daniel's resistance. She had indeed always trusted Sophia's instincts about people. "I'll call her tonight," he promised. They continued walking. in silence until they reached the corner of their street. A sleek black car was parked in front of their modest home, the same rental Clarence had described. Daniel stopped. "Sophia, go to the Jenkins house. Tell Wilfred I'll be there shortly." "But Dad, now please." Sophia reluctantly crossed the street to their neighbor's home while Daniel approached his own house. Brian Mitchell stood on the porch, looking remarkably unchanged from when they'd worked together 5 years earlier. Still trim, impeccably dressed, with prematurely grey hair that lent him an air of distinction. "Hello, Daniel." Brian extended his hand. "It's been a long time." Daniel ignored the offered hand. "What are you doing here, Brian?" Brian lowered his arm, unsurprised by the cold reception. "I need to talk to you. It's important." "I have nothing to say to anyone from Holloway Industries. I'm not here on company business." Brian glanced around. "Can we speak privately?" Against his better judgment, Daniel unlocked the door. 10 minutes. Inside, Brian surveyed the modest living room. Worn furniture, faded curtains, walls that needed fresh paint. His expression remained neutral, but Daniel detected a flicker of pity that stoked his resentment. "What do you want?" Daniel demanded. "To warn you." Brian's tone was grave. "Edward Holloway knows you're in contact with Margaret Kensington. He's concerned." "Concerned?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "About what? I'm just a small-town mechanic now, remember? He made sure of that. A mechanic who still has the original designs for a safety system that could be worth billions. A mechanic who's now connected to one of the most powerful investors in the Midwest." Brian held Daniel's gaze. "Edward thinks you're planning to resurrect the project with Kensington backing. And if I am, then you need to be extremely careful. Edward has invested millions in a competing system that's inferior to your design. If yours comes to market first with proven better results..." Brian trailed off. "He'd lose everything," Daniel finished. "Exactly, and Edward doesn't lose gracefully." Daniel studied his former colleague with newfound suspicion. "Why are you telling me this? You took my job after they forced me out." Brian's expression tightened. "I took the job because someone had to protect your work from being completely dismantled. I've spent 5 years making minimal progress on the project, claiming technical difficulties, while preventing Edward from bringing in someone who would actually dismantle your original concept." Daniel blinked in surprise. "You were protecting my work. I owed you that much. We all did." Brian sighed. "The team knew what Edward did to you was wrong. Some of us tried to speak up, but after seeing what happened to you..." He shrugged, the gesture conveying both apology and explanation. "And now," Daniel pressed, "now Edward is panicking. He's planning to discredit you further to ensure Margaret Kensington won't risk her reputation on you." Brian reached into his jacket and withdrew a flash drive. "This contains all your original design files, plus documentation of the sabotage and Edward's subsequent cover-up. I've been gathering evidence for years." Daniel stared at the small device Brian placed on the coffee table. "Why give this to me now?" "Because I'm leaving Holloway Industries, taking a position with a startup in California." Brian straightened his tie. "I've kept my mouth shut for 5 years out of fear, and frankly to protect my career. I'm not proud of it. Consider this my attempt at making amends." Daniel remained skeptical. "How do I know this isn't a trap? Something Edward orchestrated?" Brian smiled thinly. "You don't. But think about it. What would Edward gain from giving you proof of his sabotage?" He moved toward the door. "My advice? If you're serious about working with Margaret Kensington, move quickly. Edward already has people looking into her background, trying to find leverage." After Brian departed, Daniel sat motionless on his couch, the flash drive a small but weighty presence on the table before him. Eventually, he retrieved his laptop, a second-hand model barely adequate for basic functions, and inserted the drive. What he found exceeded his expectations. Not only were his original design files intact, but Brian had methodically documented the sabotage. Security footage showing Edward entering the lab the night before the demonstration, emails discussing how to blame Daniel, internal memos about suppressing evidence. It was everything Daniel would need to clear his name and potentially destroy Edward Holloway in the process. By the time Sophia returned from the Jenkins house, Daniel had come to a decision. He needed to talk to Margaret, not just about the STEM lab or her offers of assistance, but about what to do with this explosive information. "Is everything okay?" Sophia asked, eyeing him carefully. "Yes," Daniel said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Actually, I think things might finally be looking up." The Kensington Lake House was illuminated against the early evening sky when Daniel arrived. The housekeeper who answered the door, an older woman Daniel hadn't met during their dinner visit, led him to a home office where Margaret sat reviewing documents. She looked up in surprise as he entered. "Daniel, I wasn't expecting you." No, I should have called." He hesitated. "I wanted to thank you for the STEM lab. Sophia is thrilled. She's remarkable. Her project has genuine commercial potential." Margaret set aside her papers. "But I don't think you came all this way just to say thank you." "No." Daniel placed the flash drive on her desk. "I had a visitor today, Brian Mitchell from Holloway Industries. He brought me this." Margaret picked up the drive, her expression questioning. "It contains evidence that Edward Holloway deliberately sabotaged my safety system prototype. Enough to clear my name and potentially file charges for fraud, corporate espionage, defamation." Daniel took a deep breath. "Brian says Edward knows about our connection. He's worried we're planning to revive my project." "Are we?" Margaret asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Daniel had been avoiding it for days, torn between desire and fear, between past wounds and future possibilities. "I want to," he admitted finally, "but I'm afraid. Not just of Edward Holloway, but of failing again, of letting Sophia down if I reach for something and miss." Margaret's expression softened. "May I show you something?" She led him through the house to a room he hadn't seen during their dinner, a home office converted into a makeshift workspace. On the large table that dominated the center of the room were printouts of technical specifications, market analyses, and to Daniel's shock, detailed renderings of his safety system design. "What is this?" he asked, scanning the materials in disbelief. "Research," Margaret explained. "I wanted to understand what you created, to see if it was as revolutionary as you described." She gestured to the documents. "It is. If anything, you undersold its potential. You did all this research based on publicly available information, and some not so public," Margaret acknowledged. "The Kensington Foundation has connections at the patent office. Your preliminary filings were very thorough." Daniel moved around the table, examining the work Margaret had compiled. What struck him wasn't just the thoroughness of her research, but the notes she'd made in the margins, insightful questions about implementation, suggestions for improved materials, considerations about manufacturing scalability. "You understand?" "And this," he realized aloud, "the engineering, not just the business aspects." Margaret smiled slightly. "I have degrees in both mechanical engineering and business. Before I took over the foundation, I designed wind turbine components." Daniel stared at her in surprise. This wasn't in any of the press coverage he'd found about her online. "Why hide that part of your background?" "I don't hide it, but in certain circles, being a woman with technical expertise means not being taken seriously as a business leader. So I let people see what they expect to see." She met his gaze directly, "Much like you let people see only the mechanic, not the innovator." The observation was too accurate to deny. Daniel had retreated into the simplicity of mechanical work, finding comfort in problems he could diagnose and fix, hiding his greater ambitions even from himself. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. "A partnership," Margaret said. "Your design expertise and my business resources. We establish a new company, independent of both Holloway Industries and Kensington Investments. We develop your safety system properly, bring it to market, and potentially save thousands of lives." "And Edward Holloway?" "We use the evidence Brian provided as leverage, not for revenge, but to ensure he doesn't interfere." Margaret's expression hardened. "I've dealt with men like Edward Holloway before. They only respect power and consequences." Daniel considered her proposal, searching for hidden pitfalls or ulterior motives. But all he saw in Margaret's eyes was sincere determination and something else that made his heart beat faster. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked quietly. "Is it guilt over what your grandfather did to mine? Professional interest in a promising technology, or something else?" Margaret held his gaze steadily. "All of those reasons, and yes, something else too." She stepped closer. "I've spent 15 years building a business empire, Daniel. I've made billions, funded important causes, earned respect in industries that didn't want to give it. But in all that time, I've rarely met someone who wasn't interested in what I could do for them. Someone with genuine integrity, who sees me as a person, not a bank account or a business connection." "And you think that's me?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. "I know it is. You've resisted my help at every turn, even when it would benefit you enormously." She smiled. "It's infuriating and oddly refreshing." Daniel couldn't help but laugh at her candor. "So where do we go from here?" "We start small. Review the evidence Brian provided. Consult with my legal team about the best approach to neutralize Edward Holloway. Then we begin rebuilding your design, properly documented and protected this time." Margaret paused. "But before any of that, there's something else I'd like to do." "What's that?" "Have dinner with you again, not to discuss business or family history or old wrongs." Her voice softened. "Just dinner, just us." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. Daniel thought of all the reasons to say no. Their different worlds, his responsibilities to Sophia, the complications of mixing business and personal relationships. Yet looking at Margaret now, seeing not the wealthy investor but the woman who had researched his work so thoroughly, who had brought resources to Sophia's school without fanfare, who wore her grandmother's ring as a connection to her own past, he found he wanted to say yes more than he'd wanted anything in a very long time. "I'd like that," he said simply. Margaret's smile lit up her face, transforming her from the composed businesswoman into someone more vibrant and approachable. For the first time since Christine's death, Daniel felt the stirring of feelings he'd thought long buried: hope, anticipation, and the quiet thrill of new beginnings. As he prepared to leave, Margaret walked him to the door. "About Edward Holloway," she said, her tone becoming businesslike again. "Don't underestimate what he might do. Men like him are most dangerous when cornered." "I'll be careful," Daniel promised. "We'll be careful," Margaret corrected gently. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The words echoed in Daniel's mind as he drove home through the quiet streets of Evergreen Valley. Together. It had been so long since he'd had a partner in facing life's challenges, so long since he'd allowed himself to need or want one. Yet as the stars appeared in the clear night sky above, Daniel found himself embracing the possibility that perhaps the most unexpected turns in life's road could lead to the most promising destinations. The regional science competition was held in the Westridge University Conference Center, a gleaming, Larson steel structure that made Evergreen Valley High School look like a relic from another century. Students from 23 schools across 3 states had gathered to present their projects, all vying for scholarships and recognition. Daniel, stood near the back of the exhibition hall, watching Sophia explain her algae-based biofuel system to a panel of judges. Her presentation board was modest compared to some of the elaborate displays from wealthier schools, but the data from the STEM lab had allowed her to create compelling visualizations of her results. "She's remarkable," Teresa Gomez said, appearing beside him. "The judges are impressed." "Thanks to your guidance," Daniel acknowledged. Teresa shook her head. "I just pointed her in the right direction. The talent is all hers." She nodded toward the entrance. "Your friend is here." Daniel turned to see Margaret entering the hall. Unlike her usual business attire, she wore a simple blouse and pants, her hair pulled back in a casual style that made her look younger, less intimidating. Several heads turned to follow her progress through the room. Margaret Kensington was a recognizable figure in certain circles, but she paid no attention to the whispers that followed her. "Daniel," she greeted him with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not too late. Board meeting ran long. You're just in time. Sophia's finishing her presentation now." Margaret watched as Sophia confidently answered a judge's question about long-term environmental impact. "She reminds me of myself at that age. The same determination. With better guidance, I hope," Daniel said quietly, referencing what Margaret had shared about her own difficult upbringing under her grandfather's influence. "Much better," Margaret agreed. "You've given her something precious, Daniel. A moral compass in a world that often rewards its absence." Before Daniel could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Edward Holloway had arrived, accompanied by two assistants who hovered around him like satellites. At 55, Edward remained imposingly tall, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to deference. "What's he doing here?" Daniel muttered, tension immediately stiffening his posture. "The Holloway Foundation sponsors the competition," Margaret explained. "I didn't realize he would attend personally." Edward surveyed the room with practiced indifference until his gaze landed on Daniel and Margaret. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight downturn of his mouth, before he composed himself and began, making his way toward them. "Daniel Roberts," Edward said, his voice carrying just the right note of surprised pleasure. "What an unexpected reunion." "Edward," Daniel acknowledged stiffly, "and Margaret Kensington. Now, this is interesting." Edward's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't aware you two knew each other. Recent acquaintances," Margaret replied smoothly. "Evergreen Valley is a small community." "Indeed." Edward's gaze shifted to the exhibition floor. "Which project is yours, Daniel? I assume you have a child competing?" "My daughter Sophia, biofuel development." "Ambitious," Edward remarked, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Though perhaps she shouldn't get her hopes up. The competition is quite rigorous." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Before Daniel could respond, Margaret intervened. "Actually, Sophia's project has already attracted attention from several university research programs," she said pleasantly. "Regardless of today's outcome, her future looks exceptionally bright." Edward's smile tightened. "How fortunate she has such powerful supporters." "Just appreciative ones," Margaret corrected. "Talent deserves recognition, don't you agree?" Their exchange was interrupted as the judges began moving to the next project. Sophia, catching sight of her father, gave a thumbs up and mouthed, "They liked it." Her expression clouded with confusion when she noticed who stood beside him. "If you'll excuse me," Daniel said, stepping away to join his daughter. "Of course," Edward replied. "We should catch up properly sometime, Daniel. I hear you've been exploring some historical projects recently." The deliberate emphasis made the meaning clear. Edward knew about the evidence Brian had provided. As Daniel walked away, he heard Margaret engage Edward in conversation about the foundation's sponsorship, effectively keeping him occupied. Sophia met her father halfway across the hall, her eyes wide. Dad, that's Edward Holloway. What's he doing talking to you and Margaret? Politics, Daniel said simply. Don't worry about it. How did your presentation go? I think really well. The head judge said my energy yield calculations were remarkably sophisticated. Sophia beamed, then glanced back at Margaret and Edward. Is everything okay? You look worried. Everything's fine, Daniel assured her, though his mind was racing. Edward's presence and thinly veiled threats confirmed what Brian had warned him about. The situation was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. The awards ceremony began 30 minutes later. Daniel and Margaret sat together in the audience, while Sophia waited nervously with the other competitors on stage. Teresa Gomez had joined a group of teachers near the front, occasionally glancing back at Daniel with encouraging smiles. As the minor awards were announced, Edward Holloway took the podium to present the grand prize. His practiced charm was on full display as he spoke about nurturing young scientific talent and the Holloway Foundation's commitment to education. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, Edward announced. This year's Regional Science Competition Grand Prize, which includes a full scholarship to the Engineering Summer Institute at Westridge University, goes to... The pause stretched dramatically. Jason Miller from Lakeside Preparatory Academy for his project on medical isotope production methods. Polite applause filled the hall as a tall boy from one of the wealthiest schools in the region stepped forward to accept the trophy. Daniel saw Sophia's shoulders slump slightly before she composed herself, joining in the applause with a grace that made his heart ache with pride. Sophia Roberts from Evergreen Valley High School receives our Distinguished Innovation Award, Edward continued, almost as an afterthought, for demonstrating exceptional creativity in biofuel development. More applause, though noticeably less enthusiastic than for the winner. Sophia accepted her smaller trophy and certificate with a dignified smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. This is wrong, Margaret whispered to Daniel. Her project was superior in every measurable category. It's how the game is played, Daniel replied, the bitterness in his voice unmistakable. Connections matter more than merit. As the ceremony concluded, Edward made a point of being photographed with Jason Miller while largely ignoring the other winners. The message couldn't have been clearer. Edward Holloway rewarded those from his world and dismissed those who weren't. Sophia rejoined them as the crowd began dispersing, her expression a mixture of disappointment and determination. Distinguished. Innovation doesn't include the Summer Institute scholarship, she explained, though Daniel had already guessed as much. Your project was brilliant, Sophia, Margaret said firmly. Anyone with technical knowledge could see that. Thanks. Sophia managed a small smile. At least I got something, and the judges gave me really good feedback for next year. Daniel marveled at his daughter's resilience. At 15, she already understood how to navigate disappointment with grace, a skill he was still struggling to master at 42. As they prepared to leave, a distinguished older man approached their small group. Ms. Roberts, I'm Professor Harrison from Westridge Engineering Department. Your biofuel efficiency metrics were remarkable. I'd like to speak with you about a junior researcher position in our summer program. Sophia's eyes widened. But I didn't win the scholarship. This would be a different arrangement, Professor Harrison explained. A stipend position, working directly with our renewable energy team, if you're interested. She is, Daniel said quickly, seeing the hope bloom on Sophia's face. Excellent. We'll be in touch with details. The professor handed Sophia his card before departing. Did that just happen? Sophia asked, staring at the card in disbelief. It did, Margaret confirmed with a small smile, and completely on your own merit. As they walked toward the exit, Edward Holloway intercepted them. Congratulations on your award, Miss Roberts. Distinguished innovation is nothing to sneeze at. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," Sophia replied politely, though Daniel could sense her discomfort. "Your father and I were just discussing old times," Edward continued, his gaze shifting to Daniel. "He made quite an impression at Holloway Industries years ago. Perhaps he's told you about his abrupt departure from our company." Before Daniel could intervene, Sophia's chin lifted defiantly. "He told me he took responsibility for someone else's mistake. That's what honorable people do." Edward's smile faltered. "Youth and its idealism, how charming." He turned to Margaret. "Margaret, I hope you know what you're getting into. Daniel's history with corporate partnerships is problematic at best." "I make my own judgments, Edward," Margaret replied coolly, "based on facts, not rumors." "Facts can be such stubborn things," Edward agreed, his eyes narrowing. "Speaking of which, I recently uncovered some interesting documentation about the old safety system project. We should discuss it sometime." "I look forward to it," Margaret said with a calm that Daniel envied. "My legal team will be fascinated by your interpretation of events." Edward's expression hardened momentarily before he recovered his composure. "Always the shrewd businesswoman. We'll talk soon." With a final nod to Sophia, he departed, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his. "Wait, what was that about?" Sophia asked. "Adult complications," Daniel said, guiding her toward the exit. "Nothing for you to worry about." "That's what you always say when something's wrong," Sophia observed, with the perceptiveness that sometimes caught him off guard. Outside the conference center, Teresa Gomez congratulated Sophia on her award and the professor's interest before heading to the bus where the other Evergreen Valley students waited. "I'm proud of you," Daniel told Sophia as she prepared to join her classmates. "The way you handled everything in there, the judging, the award, even Edward Holloway showed real character." Sophia hugged him tightly. "Thanks, Dad. Professor, Harrison's offer is even better than winning, right? It's a real research position." "Absolutely," Daniel agreed, though he worried about the logistics. Housing in Chicago for the summer would be expensive, not to mention transportation and other expenses. As if reading his thoughts, Margaret spoke up. "Sophia, the Kensington Foundation maintains several apartments near Westridge for visiting researchers. You'd be welcome to use one if you accept the position." Sophia's eyes widened. "Really? That would be amazing." She glanced at her father. "If Dad says it's okay." Daniel hesitated only briefly. "We'll discuss the details, but yes, that's very generous." After Sophia departed with her classmates, Daniel and Margaret were left alone in the parking lot. "Edward's more aggressive than I anticipated," Margaret observed. "Mentioning documentation about the safety system was a direct threat." "He knows we have Brian's evidence," Daniel confirmed. "He's trying to counter it with something. Fabricated evidence, most likely." Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. "We should accelerate our timeline. I'll have my legal team prepare cease and desist orders regarding your intellectual property, and we'll file preliminary patents under our new company structure immediately." "Our company," Daniel repeated, still adjusting to the concept. "Have you settled on a name?" "I was thinking Roberts Kensington Safety Systems." Margaret smiled at his surprised expression. "Your name deserves to be first. It's your innovation." "Thank you," Daniel said simply, touched by the gesture. "About Sophia and the apartment, it's no imposition. The units sit empty most of the summer anyway." Margaret paused. "Unless you're uncomfortable with the arrangement." Daniel considered. The offer. A month ago, his pride might have compelled him to refuse. Now, seeing the opportunity it represented for Sophia, he found that pride mattered less than pragmatism. "I'm not uncomfortable, just grateful." He hesitated. "Though I'd like to contribute something toward it. I can't match your resources, but I want Sophia to see that I'm investing in her future too. Of course, Margaret agreed readily. We'll work something out that feels equitable to you. As they walked to their respective vehicles, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Daniel found himself studying Margaret's profile, appreciating the quiet confidence she projected even after Edward's confrontation. "You handled Edward brilliantly," he remarked. "He's not used to people standing their ground. Men like Edward mistake wealth for power and fear for respect," Margaret replied. "Remove those illusions, and they're surprisingly vulnerable. Is that what you did with your grandfather? Removed the illusions?" The question was more personal than he'd intended, but Margaret didn't seem offended. "Eventually. It took me years to see past the mythology he'd created around himself. By the time I understood who he truly was, a bully who couldn't bear to be challenged, he was too old to fight back." They reached Margaret's car first. Instead of immediately getting in, she turned to face Daniel. "We still owe each other that dinner," she reminded him. "Just us, no business discussion." "I'd like that," Daniel agreed. "Though after today, I'm not sure anywhere in Evergreen Valley would feel private enough." "I was thinking the same thing." Margaret's expression turned playful. "How do you feel about cooking? My kitchen is underutilized, and I've been told I make an excellent sous chef." The invitation carried implications beyond a simple meal, and they both knew it. Daniel thought about Sophia, safely occupied with her classmates for the evening, about Edward Holloway's threats and what they might face in the coming weeks, about the growing connection between himself and the remarkable woman before him. "I'd enjoy that," he said finally. "I make a pretty decent coq au vin. If you have the ingredients, I'll make sure of it." Margaret's smile held warmth that banished the chill of Edward's confrontation. 7 o'clock? 7 it is. As Margaret drove away, Daniel remained standing in the parking lot, processing the day's events. Edward's appearance had confirmed the battle ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous to his and Sophia's stability. Yet for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in facing adversity. The afternoon sun glinted off his truck's worn paint, reminding him how much his life had changed in the short weeks since Margaret's car had broken down on that rainy night. From struggling mechanic to potential business partner, from lonely widower to whatever was developing between them now. Daniel turned the key in his ignition, a sense of determined anticipation replacing the resignation that had been his companion for so long. Whatever came next, with Edward Holloway, with the safety system, with Margaret, he was ready to face it head-on, rather than simply endure it. The road ahead might be uncertain, but for once, its possibilities seemed more promising than perilous. Evening light bathed Margaret's kitchen in golden hues as Daniel carefully stirred the coq au vin, letting the rich aroma of wine, mushrooms, and herbs fill the air. Margaret moved about the spacious kitchen with unexpected ease, chopping vegetables for a salad while Daniel managed the main dish. "Where did you learn to cook?" Margaret asked, setting down her knife to pour them each another glass of wine. "Necessity. At first," Daniel replied, accepting the glass with a nod of thanks. "After Christine died, I had to figure it out for Sophia's sake. Then I discovered I actually enjoyed it. The precision, the creativity. It's not that different from engineering. Or business strategy," Margaret added, "combining elements in the right proportions to create something greater than the sum of its parts." Their conversation flowed naturally, neither forcing nor avoiding personal topics. The pretense of no business discussion had evolved into genuine interest in each other's lives beyond their professional connection. "Tell me about Christine," Margaret said as they worked side by side. "If that's not too painful," Daniel considered. The request. Normally, he avoided discussing his late wife with anyone outside his closest circle, yet with Margaret, the urge to share felt natural rather than intrusive. She was a high school English teacher, brilliant, passionate about literature, always carrying a book. A smile touched his lips at the memory. We met in college. I was this intensely focused engineering student, and she was the arts major who somehow convinced me that poetry had as much to teach me as physics. She sounds wonderful. She was. Even during her illness, she never lost her spirit. She'd make the nurses at chemo laugh until they cried. Daniel paused, testing a piece of chicken with a fork. When she was diagnosed, I was still at Holloway, working insane hours on the safety system. I cut back immediately, but there were days I couldn't be with her because of critical deadlines. That must have been impossible to navigate, Margaret observed softly. It was, but Christine understood. She'd say, "Your work will save lives, Daniel. Don't stop because of me." He swallowed hard. After she died and then the scandal happened, losing that project felt like I'd failed her twice. Margaret touched his arm gently. "You didn't fail her. Edward Holloway stole what you were building. There's a difference." "Maybe, but for years I couldn't separate the two losses in my mind." Daniel turned to face Margaret fully. "What about you? You mentioned an ex-husband once." Margaret's expression tightened slightly. "Victor, a merger more than a marriage in retrospect. He was from the same social circle, ambitious, well-connected, impeccable pedigree, the kind of man my grandfather approved of, but not the kind you wanted. I thought I did. We made sense on paper, both driven, business-minded." Margaret arranged sliced tomatoes on the salad with precise movements. 3 years in, I discovered he was manipulating company resources, setting up shadow investments my board couldn't see. When I confronted him, he acted as if I should have expected it. "Financial infidelity," Daniel observed. "Precisely. But the betrayal wasn't about money. It was the assumption that I would look the other way because we were married, that our vows somehow included permission to compromise my ethics." Margaret's voice hardened. "I filed for divorce the next day." "Did he fight it?" "Not the divorce itself. The settlement was another matter. He felt entitled to a significant portion of my company, despite the prenuptial agreement. It got ugly." "I'm sorry," Margaret shrugged, her composure returning. "It was years ago. The experience taught me to trust my instincts about people, not their credentials or connections." She gave him a meaningful look. "Which is why I trusted you almost immediately." The statement hung between them, intimate in its honesty. Daniel felt an unexpected warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. Dinner itself was a success, both culinarily and conversationally. They moved to the lake-facing porch afterward, sharing coffee as stars emerged over the water. The physical distance between them on the porch swing had gradually diminished throughout the evening, and now their shoulders touched comfortably. "I spoke with my legal team today," Margaret said, breaking their comfortable silence. "They've prepared the incorporation documents for Roberts Kensington. We can sign them whenever you're ready." Daniel nodded, appreciating that she'd waited until after dinner for business matters. "I'd like Sophia to be there when we do. She deserves to see this part of the journey." "Of course. It's her future too." Margaret hesitated. "There's something else. My team analyzed the evidence Brian provided. It's compelling, but Edward will fight it. We need to be prepared for how personal this might get." "What do you mean?" Margaret set her coffee down. "Edward won't just attack the evidence. He'll attack you. Your character, your history, possibly even Sophia." Her expression grew serious. "You should know what you're walking into." "I've faced his tactics before," Daniel reminded her. "Not like this. When Edward was framing you for the prototype failure, he had institutional power on his side. Now that we're challenging that narrative with evidence, he's likely to escalate beyond professional attacks." Daniel considered this. "You think he'll try to discredit me personally. It's what men like Edward do when facts don't favor them. They make it about character instead of evidence." Margaret's gaze was steady. "Is there anything in your past he might use? Anything that could embarrass Sophia?" Daniel thought carefully. "Nothing significant. Some financial struggles after Christine's medical bills, a few late payments when we first moved to Evergreen Valley. Nothing criminal or scandalous." "Good. And be prepared for him to twist your relationship with me into something unsavory, suggesting you're using me for financial gain or business advantages. That's ridiculous," Daniel protested. "Of course it is, but perception matters in these battles." Margaret's hand found his, her fingers interlacing with his own. "Which brings me to something I've been thinking about. What exactly is this between us, Daniel?" The direct question caught him off guard, though he'd been wondering the same thing. "I'm not sure I have a simple answer for that." "Then give me a complicated one," she challenged gently. Daniel looked out over the darkened lake, gathering his thoughts. "When Christine died, I thought that part of my life was over. I focused entirely on Sophia, on keeping our heads above water. I couldn't imagine making room for anyone else." He turned back to Margaret. "And then you broke down on that road, with that ring on your finger, and suddenly everything started changing. Is that a good thing?" "I think it is," Daniel admitted. "I feel awake again, like I'm not just surviving anymore." He squeezed her hand. "But it's complicated. We're from different worlds. We're about to become business partners. And Sophia is the most important consideration," Margaret finished for him. "As she should be. Yes, she likes you, which is significant. She's never shown interest in anyone I've..." He trailed off, realizing what he was implying. "Anyone you've dated?" Margaret supplied with a small smile. "Not that there's been anyone, but hypothetically, yes." "For what it's worth, I like her too. She reminds me of myself at that age, bright, determined, unwilling to accept limitation." Margaret shifted to face him more directly. "I'm not looking to replace her mother, Daniel, but I do care about both of you in ways I hadn't anticipated when we met." The honesty of her statement deserved equal candor in return. "I care about you, too, more than I expected, more than is probably wise, given everything else happening around us." Margaret's free hand rose to touch his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "Wisdom is overrated sometimes." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing unfamiliar territory. Then Daniel's arm encircled her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened, years of dormant emotion finding unexpected release. When they finally parted, Margaret's usual composure had given way to something more vulnerable, more genuine. "Well," she said softly, "that complicates things in the best possible way." Daniel laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. "I'm getting pretty good at complicated these days." The ringing of Daniel's phone interrupted the moment. He checked the screen with a frown. "It's Clarence. He never calls this late." "Daniel." Clarence's voice was tight with worry. "You need to get back to the shop right away. There's been a break-in. Dixon Auto Repair was surrounded by police cars, their lights painting the night in alternating blue and red." Daniel parked across the street, Margaret pulling in beside him. They'd driven separately from the lake house, needing both vehicles for their respective journeys home. Officer Paul Mitchell met them at the perimeter of yellow police tape. "Daniel, bad business here." "What happened?" Daniel asked, surveying the shattered front window of the garage. "Someone broke in around 9, ransacked the office completely." Paul glanced at Margaret with curiosity. "Margaret Kensington," Daniel explained briefly. "A friend. Is Clarence okay?" "Shaken up, but fine. He got here just as the perps were leaving. They'd triggered the silent alarm, nearly ran him down with their car." Daniel pushed past the officer toward the garage, where Clarence sat on a bench outside, giving a statement to another policeman. "Clarence, are you hurt?" The older man looked up, relief flooding his features. "Daniel, no, I'm all right. Just missed." "Me?" He gestured toward the garage, but they tore the place apart. Filing cabinets emptied, computers smashed, even ripped up the floorboards in the office. Daniel froze. The floorboards. Yeah, strange thing to target, huh? Almost like they knew something was hidden there. Daniel exchanged a significant look with Margaret, who had followed closely behind. Him? The lockbox with his grandfather's items had been under those floorboards. "Did they take it?" he asked urgently. Clarence shook his head. "Didn't find what they were looking for, near as I can tell. I keep the day's cash in the safe at my house, and nothing else valuable was stored here." Relief washed over Daniel. He'd moved the lockbox to his home after retrieving his grandfather's sketch of the rings. The break-in had failed in its primary objective, if, as he suspected, Edward Holloway was behind it. "Can we look inside?" Daniel asked Officer Mitchell. "Briefly. Try not to touch anything. Forensics is still processing." The interior of the garage was a disaster. Tools scattered across the floor, filing cabinets upended, computer equipment destroyed. But it was the office that had received the worst treatment. As Clarence had described, the floorboards had been pried up, splintered wood sticking out at jagged angles. "This wasn't a random burglary," Margaret observed quietly. "No," Daniel agreed. "This was Edward sending a message." "You think Holloway did this?" Officer Mitchell asked, overhearing them. Daniel hesitated, aware of the implications of accusing someone of Edward's stature without proof. "I can't say for certain, but the timing is suspicious." "What timing?" "We're filing patents tomorrow that could potentially impact Holloway Industries' business interests," Margaret explained smoothly. "Corporate espionage occasionally turns physical." Officer Mitchell looked skeptical but made a note. "We'll look into it. In the meantime, you might want to upgrade security here. And at your home, Daniel." The suggestion sent a chill through. "Daniel, you think my house could be a target too? If this was targeted rather than random, it's a possibility." Margaret touched Daniel's arm. "Sophia, she's at the Jenkins tonight. Science team celebration sleepover." Daniel checked his watch. "But I should call and make sure everything's okay." While Daniel stepped outside to make the call, Margaret surveyed the damage more thoroughly. "Clarence," she asked, "did you see the vehicle they used, or get a description of the individuals?" Dark SUV, tinted windows, 2 men, both wearing masks. Professional job. Clarence's eyes narrowed. "You know who did this, don't you?" "We have suspicions," Margaret admitted, "but no proof yet." Daniel returned, visibly relieved. "Sophia's fine. Dorothy said all the girls are already asleep." "That's good," Clarence said. "But Paul's right. You should think about better security at your place, especially with Sophia there." Daniel nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in. What had seemed like a business conflict was rapidly becoming more personal and potentially dangerous. "You can stay at my place tonight," Margaret offered quietly. "Both of you, if needed. I have a security system and cameras." The offer was practical rather than romantic given the circumstances, but Daniel appreciated it nonetheless. "Thank you, but I should be at home in case they try something there." "Then I'm sending my security team to watch your house tonight," Margaret said in a tone that brooked no argument. "We can discuss permanent arrangements tomorrow, after providing full statements to the police and helping Clarence secure what remained of the garage. Daniel and Margaret stood beside their cars, the events of the evening having dramatically altered the warmth of their earlier connection. "I'm sorry about this," Daniel said, gesturing toward the damaged garage. "Not exactly how I planned our evening to end." "Don't apologize. This is Edward's doing, not yours." Margaret's expression was resolute. "If anything, this confirms we're on the right track. He wouldn't resort to intimidation tactics if he weren't truly worried about what we're building." It's not just the business I'm concerned about, Daniel admitted. If he's willing to go this far, Sophia could be at risk. She won't be, Margaret assured him. I'm calling my head of security right now. He'll have someone watching your house within the hour. She grasped his hand firmly. Edward wants you to be afraid, Daniel. That's the point of all this, to make you retreat, to question whether moving forward is worth the risk. Daniel squeezed her hand in return. I'm not retreating, but I need to be smart about protecting Sophia while we fight this battle. We will be together. Margaret leaned forward, brushing a quick kiss against his cheek. Get some rest. Tomorrow we sign the incorporation papers and file the patents. Then we take the fight directly to Edward. As Daniel drove home through the quiet streets of Evergreen Valley, he replayed the evening in his mind. The warmth and connection of dinner, the unexpected intimacy of their kiss, the shock of the break-in. Life had taught him that happiness was often fleeting, snatched away just when it seemed within reach. Yet despite the threat now looming over them, Daniel felt an unfamiliar resolve strengthening within him. Edward Holloway had already taken so much, his career, his reputation, years of professional fulfillment. But this time, Daniel wasn't facing him alone. This time, he had something, someone worth fighting for. When he arrived home, Daniel checked every window and door before settling in his living room, unwilling to sleep until Margaret's security detail arrived. On the mantel, Christine's photograph seemed to watch him with familiar understanding. We're not backing down this time, he told the silent image. Not from Edward and not from whatever's happening with Margaret. I think you'd approve of both decisions. The sound of a car pulling up outside drew his attention. Through the window, he saw a discreet black sedan parking across the street. The driver's face was professionally neutral as he settled in for the night's watch. Daniel closed the curtains, feeling oddly reassured. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, at least his home and daughter were safe. And in this moment of calm, before the coming storm, that was enough. 3 months later, the newly renovated office space of Roberts Kensington Safety Systems hummed with activity. What had once been an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Evergreen Valley now housed a team of engineers, legal experts, and administrative staff. Large windows let in natural light, illuminating workstations where the safety system prototype was being perfected. Daniel stood at the center of the main floor, reviewing technical specifications with Emily Parker, a brilliant young engineer who had been one of their first hires. The professional transformation in Daniel was evident. Gone was the grease-stained mechanic in worn work clothes, replaced by a confident technical director whose expertise commanded respect. The response time is still lagging by 0.3 seconds, Emily pointed out, highlighting a section of data on her tablet. Not much, but in collision scenarios, every millisecond matters, Daniel finished. Let's adjust the predictive algorithm to account for variable surface conditions. That might give us the edge we need. As Emily departed to implement the changes, Daniel took a moment to absorb the reality around him. In just 3 months, what had begun as a tentative partnership born from a chance roadside encounter had evolved into a full-fledged company with 18 employees and significant financial backing. The patent applications had been expedited, securing their intellectual property against Edward Holloway's attempts to claim prior ownership. The sound of familiar footsteps drew Daniel's attention to the staircase leading from the executive offices on the mezzanine level. Margaret descended, phone pressed to her ear, her expression shifting from intense concentration to satisfaction as she concluded her call. Good news? Daniel asked as she joined him. Very good. Margaret confirmed, her smile warming as she moved. Beside him, the Transportation Safety Board wants to review our test results. If they're as promising as our simulations indicate, they're considering fast-tracking approval for implementation in new vehicle models next year. That's months ahead of schedule, Daniel noted, impressed. Apparently, our preliminary data caught someone's attention. The reduction in projected fatalities was too significant to ignore. Margaret's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally, a small gesture of affection they now shared comfortably, even in professional settings. You did it, Daniel. Your system is going to save lives, just as you always intended. You did it, he corrected gently. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of Gregory Wallace, Margaret's attorney, who strode purposefully across the workspace with a folder tucked under his arm. Margaret, Daniel, he greeted them, his typically serious expression betraying unusual satisfaction. I have updates from the Holloway situation. They moved to a conference room where Gregory laid out several documents on the table. The judge granted our motion for injunctive relief. Holloway Industries is legally barred from pursuing their inferior safety system until our patent claims are fully adjudicated. Edward must be furious, Daniel observed. Livid would be more accurate, Gregory confirmed. But there's more. The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened a formal investigation into Holloway Industries based on the evidence we provided about the original prototype sabotage. The former security guard's testimony proved crucial. Margaret leaned forward, examining the legal documents. What about the break-in at Dixon Auto Repair? Any progress there? Indeed. Gregory slid forward a police report. The two individuals, arrested last week, have agreed to testify that they were hired by a middleman working for Edward Holloway. They've provided bank records showing the payment trail. So Edward could face criminal charges, Daniel asked, still processing this turn of events. It's increasingly likely, Gregory confirmed. The board of Holloway Industries is already distancing themselves from him. There's talk of forcing him out to salvage the company's reputation. After reviewing additional legal details, Gregory departed, leaving Daniel and Margaret alone in the conference room. The weight of what they'd accomplished hung in the air. Between them, not just the technical achievements, but the justice they'd secured after years of wrongdoing. I never expected this, Daniel admitted. When we started, I just wanted to rebuild the safety system. I never thought we'd actually see Edward held accountable. Justice can be slow, but it usually arrives eventually, Margaret replied, her expression softening as she studied him. You don't seem as satisfied as I expected, Daniel considered her observation. Not unsatisfied, just processing. 5 years of my life were defined by what Edward took from me. Now that he's facing consequences, I thought I'd feel more vindicated. Instead, I'm more focused on what we're building than what he destroyed. Daniel smiled slightly. Maybe that's real healing, when the future becomes more compelling than the past. Margaret's hand covered his on the conference table. Speaking of the future, Sophia called this morning. Her research position at Westridge is going exceptionally well. Professor Harrison mentioned she might be offered advanced placement when she applies to college. She told me. She's thriving there. Daniel's pride in his daughter was evident. The apartment has been perfect for her. She's even made friends with other research assistants in the building. I'm glad, though I imagine your house feels empty without her. It does, Daniel acknowledged. But knowing she's pursuing her dreams makes it worthwhile. A knock at the door interrupted them. Clarence Dixon entered, looking somewhat out of place in the modern office environment, but beaming with unmistakable pride. Hope I'm not interrupting important business talk, he said. Never for you, Daniel assured him, rising to greet his mentor. With a warm handshake. How's the garage renovation coming along? After the break-in, Margaret had insisted on financing comprehensive upgrades to Dixon Auto Repair, including state-of-the-art security systems and modern equipment. Clarence had initially resisted what he perceived as charity until Daniel explained it as an investment in a business partner. Roberts Kensington now outsourced all their vehicle modification work to Dixon's. "Better than new," Clarence reported. "Marco's handling things so well, I'm thinking of cutting back my hours. Maybe finally take Dorothy on that fishing trip we've been talking about for 20 years. "You've earned it," Margaret told him sincerely. "Maybe." "So?" Clarence's expression grew more serious. "Heard about Holloway on the radio driving over. Sounds like he's finally getting what's coming to him." "It appears that way," Daniel agreed. "Good. Never did trust a man who'd destroy someone else's life to protect his own interests." Clarence clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "Anyway, I'm not here about that. Dorothy's organizing a neighborhood potluck this Saturday to welcome the Jenkinses back from their son's place in Florida. Thought you both might want to come." The invitation represented more than a casual social gathering. It was Clarence's way of acknowledging the relationship that had developed between Daniel and Margaret, bringing her further into the circle of Evergreen Valley residents who had supported Daniel and Sophia through difficult years. "We'd be honored," Margaret replied, answering for both of them with a glance at Daniel for confirmation. After finalizing details for Saturday, Clarence departed, leaving them alone once more. "He's a good man," Margaret observed. "The kind who sees value in people, not just their utility. He gave me a chance when no one else would," Daniel agreed. "Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask you something." Daniel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box that had once contained his grandfather's keepsakes. "I found this while going through some old things at home. It belonged to my grandfather." He opened the box to reveal a gold tie pin, elegant in its simplicity, with a single ruby set in a pattern that matched the ring Margaret wore. "Joseph made this as a companion piece to the rings," Daniel explained. "It was meant for Catherine's husband, to connect him to the sisters' bond. But Catherine never married, so he kept it." Margaret touched the pin gently. "It's beautiful." "I'd like you to have it," Daniel said. "Not for yourself, obviously, but perhaps for the company archive we're creating. Another piece of the history that brought us together." Margaret studied him with the perceptive gaze that had first drawn him to her. "Is that the only reason you're giving it to me?" Daniel hesitated, then admitted, "No, it also feels like completing a circle. The rings brought our families together once, separated them, and then reconnected us. This feels like acknowledging that connection isn't accidental." "I believe that, too," Margaret said softly. "From the moment my car broke down and you noticed my ring, I felt we were meant to find each other." The intimacy of the moment was disrupted by Daniel's phone vibrating with an incoming call. He checked the screen and frowned slightly. "It's Wilfred Jenkins. Unusual for him to call during work hours." "Hello," Daniel answered, concern edging his voice. As he listened, his expression shifted from worry to surprise. "Are you certain?" "Yes, of course. I'll be right there." "What is it?" Margaret asked as he ended the call. "Someone delivered a package to my house. Wilfred signed for it since I wasn't home." "A package?" "From Edward Holloway." Daniel's modest home looked exactly as he'd left it that morning. No sign of trouble visible from the outside. Wilfred Jenkins waited on the porch, a medium-sized box at his feet. "Delivery truck came about an hour ago," Wilfred explained as Daniel and Margaret approached. "Driver needed a signature, said it was important." Daniel examined the package cautiously. It bore the Holloway Industries logo and Edward's name as the sender, but no other markings. "Did you open it?" Daniel asked. "Course not. Not my business." Wilfred's curiosity was evident nonetheless. "Though I did wonder why that Holloway fellow would be sending you anything, given what's in the news about him." "We're wondering the same thing," Margaret admitted. After thanking Wilfred and assuring him everything was fine, Daniel brought the package inside. He placed it on the kitchen table, both he and Margaret regarding it with justified suspicion. Could be a final attempt at intimidation, Margaret suggested. Only one way to find out. Daniel carefully opened the box. Inside, nestled in protective padding, was a framed photograph of a jewelry store from the 1950s. Daniel immediately recognized it as his grandfather's shop in Chicago. Alongside the photograph was a sealed envelope and a small velvet pouch. Daniel opened the envelope first, unfolding a letter written on Holloway Industries stationery. "Daniel," he read aloud, "by the time you receive this, you will have heard about the SEC investigation and my likely departure from Holloway Industries. The company my father built that I devoted my life to protecting will continue without me." Daniel glanced at Margaret before continuing. "I won't insult your intelligence with apologies or excuses. What I did to you 5 years ago was unforgivable, as was my recent attempt to intimidate you. My actions reflected a man who confused legacy with integrity, who believed maintaining appearances mattered more than honesty." "This doesn't sound like the Edward we know," Margaret observed quietly. "The enclosed photograph was found in my father's personal archives." Daniel continued reading. "He purchased the building that housed your grandfather's jewelry store after the fire, converting it to offices. The photograph was kept as a record of the property's history." Daniel picked up the small velvet pouch, tipping its contents into his palm. A tarnished key slid out, its design antique and distinctive. The key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Chicago, box 247. Inside, you will find items your grandfather was forced to leave behind during his hasty departure from the city. My father acquired them after the fire, but never disposed of them. Perhaps he, like me, recognized their craftsmanship even while disregarding the ethics of how they were obtained. Daniel's voice faltered slightly as he reached the end of the letter. "You beat me, Daniel, not through force or manipulation, but through persistence and integrity, qualities I once possessed before ambition consumed them. The safety system you created deserves to exist in the world. It will save lives, which matters more than saving face." The letter was signed simply Edward, with a postscript that read, "The bank has been notified to expect your inquiry. The box has been paid." For indefinitely, silence filled the kitchen as Daniel set down the letter. Margaret reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. "I think so." Daniel studied the key, turning it over in his palm. "I never expected anything like this from Edward. Sometimes facing consequences forces people to see themselves clearly for the first time," Margaret observed. "Though I wouldn't call this redemption, more like resignation with a gesture toward amends. Either way, I want to know what's in that safe deposit box," Daniel said. "Would you come with me to Chicago next week? We could visit while Sophia's still there, make it a family trip." The word family hung in the air between them, its implications unmistakable. They had been dancing around defining their relationship for weeks, both professionally committed, but personally cautious. "I'd like that very much," Margaret replied, her expression softening. "Though I should warn you, if we're visiting as family, my mother will insist on meeting you and Sophia. She's been quite curious since I told her about the ring connection." "I think we're ready for that," Daniel said with a smile. "Speaking of family," he retrieved another small box from his pocket. Not an antique this time, but new, its purpose unmistakable. "I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment." Daniel opened the box to reveal a ring, not ostentatiously expensive, but thoughtfully selected. A simple band with a pattern reminiscent of the interlocking circles from their grandparents' rings, but distinctly modern in its execution. "Daniel," Margaret whispered, genuine surprise in her eyes. I'm not proposing. Not yet, he clarified. That feels too soon, even with everything we've been through together. But I wanted you to have this as a promise, that whatever comes next, I'm committed to exploring it with you. Margaret took the ring, examining it with visible emotion. It's beautiful. The design combines elements of our past with something entirely new, Daniel explained. Like us. As Margaret slipped the ring onto her right hand, a deliberate choice that acknowledged their relationship was still evolving. The late afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, catching the gold band and casting warm reflections across the walls. There's a symmetry to all of this, Margaret observed, looking from her grandmother's ring to the new one Daniel had given her. Two rings separated and lost, only to lead to new connections generations later. My grandfather would have appreciated the poetry of it, Daniel agreed. He always said meaningful things find their way back to where they belong, even if the journey takes decades. Outside the window, Evergreen Valley stretched toward the horizon. The town that had once felt like a place of retreat now transformed into the foundation for a new beginning. The safety system Daniel had created would soon protect countless lives. Robert's Kensington was thriving, built on genuine partnership rather than exploitation. Sophia was pursuing her dreams with enthusiasm and support. And here, in this modest kitchen, where Daniel had spent so many lonely evenings, a new kind of family was taking shape. Unexpected, unconventional, but profoundly right. Margaret leaned forward, her forehead resting gently against his. Whatever's in that safe deposit box, whatever comes next with the company or Edward Holloway or anything else, we'll face it together. Together, Daniel agreed, the word no longer a tentative hope, but a steadfast commitment. As dusk began to fall over Evergreen Valley, the house that had for so long been merely a shelter transformed, filled with the quiet promise of new beginnings and the certainty that sometimes the most unexpected turns in life's journey lead precisely where we're meant to be. Through the window, the evening star appeared above the horizon, bright, constant, enduring, like the rings that had brought them together, like the bond they were carefully building, like the future now unfolding before them, full of possibility, purpose, and the quiet miracle of second chances. The end. Up next, two more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch, and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.